My brief during your course is to introduce the subject of Buddhist concepts. And the reason for this course is that although many of you are quite familiar with Buddhism or are inspired by Buddhism enough to want to come and try out being a monk at least for a month, but there are certain concepts which are very important to an understanding of Buddhism. If you don't already have the foundation of those concepts, then it will help you to understand the details of other things which you meet during the course. There are many things which we'll meet on the course, things like the law of karma is very important, also what meets the eye. But what I try to do is introduce these subjects in a fairly a structured way, so that you can put together the other things which you meet in the course, whether it's from the Buddhist culture or from the Dream Kindergarten programs which you'll see. In fact, most of the things on this course go beyond merely just the meditation or the practice. The reason we talk about concepts is because there are some things which in Buddhism where we make connections which normally are not made in science or even in other spiritual traditions. And a lot of these connections go beyond what we can see with the naked eye. A lot of the connections are not possible to understand merely by rational analysis. And in fact, even the Lord Buddha himself said that certain questions, even if you spend all day thinking about them, rationally, you could never come to a useful conclusion about them. He said that if you spend all your time thinking about them, they may even drive you mad in the end, because there's no way to come to a good conclusion just by thinking about certain questions. And he said that there are 4 major areas which are particularly difficult to get a good conclusion about merely by thinking about them. The first of these is to know about the nature or the powers of the Lord Buddha himself. To understand what it means to be the Buddha and the sort of potential which the Lord Buddha has is not possible just by rational thought. A second question, which is not possible to come to a conclusion about, is the outcomes of the law of karma. So if you know about the connections between the actions which we do in the present time and the things which will come back to us in the future, it's not possible merely by rationally extrapolating to come to good conclusions about it. A third thing is about the nature of reality. It's not possible just by thinking about it, by philosophizing, to come to a good conclusion. And last but not least, there are questions about the universe, the beginning of the universe, the end of the universe, where the universe came from in the first place, and so on, which even if you spend a long time thinking about it, you never will get a good conclusion. And more than that, you may waste so much time thinking about it that it puts you off doing the proper thing with your practice as well. But in spite of knowing that these 4 subjects are taboos, in fact, a lot of what we will talk about on the Buddhist Concepts course is actually concerning these subjects. Some people say that to learn about things in theory is not the ideal way to do it, because sometimes you can jump to conclusions. Sometimes if I tell you about something, maybe it will affect you so that you will assume that that's going to be what's happening, instead of coming to your own conclusions. But if you think about it, what I'm going to lay out before you is something rather like a roadmap. And it's like a spiritual roadmap of something which you will be able to find out by yourself as your own spiritual experience advances further. You might say that a roadmap is jumping to conclusions. It's not the real thing, and therefore you shouldn't talk about it. But if you imagine yourself as a traveler, maybe on a mountain road where there is a lot of fog and you cannot see the way ahead, then of course it's useful to have a map. The map at least will guide you in the right direction so that you can follow the road instead of falling down the cliffs. And if you can follow the map, then one day in the future, when the fog lifts, when you come out of the clouds, then you will be able to see the reality of the spiritual journey ahead without having to use the map anymore. But the reason for this spiritual map, and really the objectives of my part of the course, is that you have some idea of what you're looking for, so that you can piece together bits of knowledge which you get from other parts of the course in a systematic way, in order that you don't spend your time looking for spiritual knowledge in the wrong places, and also so that you maybe whet your appetite to look for these sort of experiences and these sorts of knowledge by your own experience. And what I'd like to do in this first session today is to talk a little bit about what sort of concepts are particularly Buddhist, and maybe to compare them a little bit with some of the other concepts which you may have learned about in connection with other religions or other philosophical views of the world. Every spiritual system has its own metaphysics, has its own higher knowledge, which helps to give people a view not only of their own spiritual beliefs, but also about their view of reality as well. And for Buddhism, some of the views concerning reality are similar to those of other religions. Some are rather different. And maybe if you haven't studied about other religious beliefs, then you may think that Buddhism is a religion which is very liberal, in which anything goes, and maybe you even would go so far as to think that Buddhism doesn't really have any particular standpoint on ethical issues. Is that true? Do you think Buddhism has a standpoint? Or do you think that Buddhism would go along with anyone or anything which any spiritual person from any religion might say? Because here in Thailand often it's the case that people say, well, all religions teach you to be good people, so it must mean that all religions are more or less the same. But I think you find out that the meaning of good in different religions can mean completely different things in some cases. In Buddhism, we say that questioning is useful up to a certain point, and especially for these four areas which I just talked about, things like the beginning of the universe, or the powers of the Buddha, or the way in which karma works. Sometimes there is a limit to how much we can learn just by questioning things. Sometimes we have to allow things to settle in our mind without questions before we can really understand them more deeply. In Buddhism, we say that basically we are good, but there may be bad things, especially what we call impurities in our mind, which cover up that goodness. And what we're trying to do through our cultivation of Buddhist practice is to uncover the good aspect of ourselves again, rediscover it. Normally, humanists would reject that we have anything more than our physical makeup, because they say that when we die, then that's the end of the story. But if it's Buddhism, we talk about the separation of body and mind. And we work a lot with our mind, and we believe that the mind goes on even after the body dies. In monotheistic religions, they would talk more in terms of body and soul. So hopefully you're starting to get a picture of what the actual boundaries of outlook on the world are that we are talking about in Buddhism. So Buddhism is not the same as humanism, although in some places it might not be very clear about that. There are certain things which we do talk about accepting on faith. But when we talk about faith in Buddhism, it's not quite the same as the faith of the monotheistic religions. Because when we talk about faith, we're not talking about blind faith, but we are talking about a sort of confidence which is based upon an understanding which we've built up about the world. So the idea is not to believe things without any explanation, but gradually to work on our understanding, and as we understand things more, then we may be able to accept things more without having to have everything explained to us, or without having to be skeptical about absolutely everything. Because certainly there are some very skeptical people in the world, and such skeptical people are quite hard to please. For example, if a person's never been to Japan before, they might not believe that Japan actually exists. They may think the pictures of Japan which they see on the television are all some sort of conspiracy by the television channel to make you believe in a country which doesn't exist. Because really you could make up a whole lot of pictures about a country which doesn't exist and fool people all over the world. So if such a skeptical person were to believe that Japan existed, they would need certain proofs. For example, the way to get irrevocable proof that Japan exists would be to, firstly, to have some sort of vehicle, like a ship or an aeroplane, which could take you there. Secondly, you would need enough money in your pocket to pay for the ticket to get on that boat or on that aeroplane. Thirdly, you need to know where you're going. And then fourthly, you would need to have the vision or have the navigational abilities to actually find your way there. So even to prove something as simple as the existence of a physical country, there are certain conditions involved with finding proof. It's not that you can just say, well, it exists and expect everyone to believe it. If you want to find proof, you can find it. And within Buddhism too, although we talk about some things which go beyond what we can see with our naked eye, it's not to say that there's not proof for the things which we talk about. Supposing you wanted to find out whether there's really life after death. Well, there are ways of finding out. But just as with Japan, you need to have certain conditions attached to finding the proof for it. Firstly, you need some sort of vehicle to take you there. Secondly, you need enough mental power or prowess or positivity to actually power you enough to get there. Thirdly, you need to know the way to get there too. And fourthly, you need to have enough brightness or vision to be able to navigate your way there too. But in terms of finding out things on the inner journey, then your vehicle would no longer be a boat or a ship, but it would be rather more like a very stable, still mind, which can be a platform which is strong enough for you to examine things which go beyond what can be seen with the naked eye.